We're going to talk about putting some backbone in your applications. We're talking about Backbone.js today. My name is Maestre. I am the platform evangelist at StackMob. And what we do at StackMob is we are a platform as a service for mobile developers to help you build, deploy, and grow your mobile apps with a full-featured backend. We provide you an SDK, you drop it into your project, and magically you've got a data store in the cloud. We support both native and JavaScript, and in fact our JavaScript SDK is built on top of Backbone as an extension, which I'll show you near the end of the presentation. My talk today is about the nuts and bolts behind Backbone and these sort of underpinnings. If you aren't familiar with Backbone, then this is going to be a great session for you. If you've been building apps for the last year on Backbone, the first half might be a little bit sort of the fundamentals and you're familiar with them, but the ending part where we talk about StackMob might be of interest to you. So I hope I have a mix of something for everyone today. So for the agenda, we'll take just a quick overview, like MVC as a landscape, what's out there, different frameworks, and what your options are to evaluate them. Models, collections, our views and templates, how do routers work, and then at the end, how you can put a little data storage behind it with StackMob. So the landscape. This is a nice slide I found online, or a nice image that shows 3 different libraries, but as you know, we are awash with JavaScript libraries. So many to choose from, so little time. I had heard of Backbone.js probably first, and then I started hearing about all these other libraries, and I was actually a little bit leaning towards checking out Spine, because I'd heard a podcast where the author was talking. But then I joined StackMob, and sort of my fate was sealed that I wanted to dive into Backbone. But I think it's important for you to look at, do some evaluation. I think that these all have different approaches to a similar common problem, which is using a model view controller pattern on the client to separate our concerns, to help you have more modular, reusable code. So I would recommend, if you are still in the evaluation stage, to go and check out Adi Osmani's to-do MVC project on GitHub. He's actually taken our Hello World app, which is, I guess, a to-do app now, and he's implemented it, and other people are contributing, and they're implementing it in all these different MVC frameworks, so you can actually see how the pieces fit together and figure out which one has the philosophy that you agree with or that best fits your project. So for today, I'm going to be working on a basic wine tasting app. As you can see, there's just one field, so it's kind of like a to-do app, but I have an affinity towards wine, so I made it a wine tasting app. And we're going to start with just, like I said, the basic building blocks, and we're just going to keep adding more and more features in Backbone until we actually have a fully functioning app. So MVC, I'm sure most of us are familiar with Model View Controller, but it's a way of separating our data from the views that our users interact with. And in between the two, we've got this concept of a controller that will take input and will pass it, pass it from the view back into your model. So for example, I have a form, I press a button, that's in my view. The controller takes the data from my view, from my form, let's say, and then pushes it into my model for me. And then here's where the important piece is. The model doesn't tell the view what to do, and the view doesn't reach into the model and know what the model has to display. What the view does, it's more passive. It basically listens for changes, and this is how Backbone does it. It says, anytime the model changes, the view says, I want to update myself. I want to refresh or re-render my view. And so it keeps it separated and keeps it decoupled, and makes it reusable, so that same model can be reused in different views. And if you change your model, you don't have to worry like you're going to break your view because it's reaching in and talking to it. When you want to get started with Backbone, you're going to include several libraries, including jQuery, as well as the underscore library. The reason why you include underscore is because Backbone is dependent on that. It uses several of the helper methods to do manipulation on arrays and objects. So you need to include that library. So let's jump into it. The model, right? With our model, we're talking about data. That's the matrix for those of you younger folk. So, great movie. The other two not so good, but the first one was great. So here we are, we're defining our model. And as you can see, we have a wine model. It's equal to backbone.model.extend. And there's nothing else to it. Our model's been defined at that point. And then what we want to do is we want to create an actual instance of our model. So I create a variable called first wine, and I'm setting one property on it. Its name. We could set multiple properties, but in this case, we're just setting one. So I'm going to jump over here to all my little demo code here. And there it is. There's your model. The white screen of nothingness we'll be seeing a little bit of today because there is no view, right? It's just our model. But with our nice web inspector here, we can actually go in and we can grab the first wine and we can output it to our console. And when we expand it, we see some different methods, and in here we see some attributes which are nice, so we can actually dig in there and dig into our attributes and find out what the name is. Something that Backbone provides that's really nice is a method called toJSON. So if I do first wine toJSON, and now I hit enter, I actually get a JSON object back which has my name and tells me what's going on inside of it. Now, we also get some additional nice little helper libraries, like we can say first wine, and I can say get, and I can actually go and get the name. So we have a nice getter right there. We can also do, let's back that up. We can say set, and let's say we want to set the year. So I'm going to set the year to 2009. Okay, now I've just set a new property on my model. And when I output it and take a look inside, now we get our name and our year. And of course, you could update the name in a similar fashion if you'd like to. So what are the options? There's lots of options. You can definitely dig into the documentation. One thing that you might want to do is you might want to set a default. So you could set the default value. So if I create a new instance of my model, it will by default be $2Chuck. I might want to have a method on my model so that when I call the update name method, I can pass in a name and then it sets it. A little bit of a trivial example, I guess, as far as methods go, but I think it illustrates the point pretty well. So collections. So this is where we talk about observing, right? Instead of having our view watching all of our models and having to listen to all these models, instead it's a lot easier if we just have our view watch a collection. And that way, if any of the models change in that collection, it's going to fire that change event that the view is looking for and observing, and then the view knows it needs to update itself. So collections are basically a grouping of models, right? Like rows in a database table. And so when we want to define our model, we simply define our collection. We simply define a model first, and then we take and we define a collection. I'm just doing it as a plural wines, and the model is wine. And there's one additional parameter, which is the URL. And the reason we have that is because Backbone wants to be RESTful. It wants to have a RESTful endpoint behind this collection so that when I add something to my collection, it will be persisted somewhere. If you don't want to do that, then you can just do what I've done, which is just put a £sign there, and it won't go anywhere. It'll essentially just live in that session for that browser window, and when you close the window or you refresh the browser, the collection and the models will go away. But that's the whole purpose of that URL parameter, is to have that RESTful backend, and I think that's why our JavaScript engineer went with Backbone for StackMob. So I'm going to initialize my collection here. And when I initialize it, I'm going to actually pass in some objects to populate it off the bat. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Oops. But actually, before that, I want to do something real quick. I actually just want to create my model here manually. So I'm going to say wines equals new wines. So I just create a new instance of my collection. And now if I actually go ahead and output that to JSON, we get our empty array, which is what we're expecting, right? We've just created a new instance of our collection. It's going to be an array of models, and so we haven't populated it. Now, if I go into my example for collections number 2 here, it's actually pre-populating it and then outputting it here to our console. So I've got two models in my collection. I've got Robert Mondavi and Cake Bread. Sounds good. And with our collections, we're going to want to be able to loop over our collections, and we want to populate, let's say, a list. Very popular with our mobile applications is our master detail view. So here I'm pulling out my wines that I've added, and I'm doing the each method, and I loop over it. Each time I loop over it, it calls a function, and it passes in one argument, which is the actual model that I'm iterating over, and I'm just pulling out the name out of that. And so here, it creates it, loops over it, outputs the names. Nothing too fancy there. And you can add methods onto your collections as well. So you can say, for my new instance of wines, I want to listen for any time the add method is called. And when that happens, I then want to call this function and say that the collection is changed. Oops, wrong one. Okay, so now my collection's changed. So let's go ahead and take a look at our wines right now. So I've got one object in there, and if I wanted to, I could go in here and I could actually manually add one more. Go in here. Oops. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so now I've added it, and I get my message, and I add again, and now when I output it, I've got 4 objects in my array. But maybe I want to remove something. Maybe I've decided that I want to go in and pull that first item that I put into my collection. I want to go ahead and delete that. So how do we go about doing that? We simply, I'm going to create a variable called my first item because I want to grab the first one out of my array, and I say wines at. And I'm going to grab the one in the first position. And let's go make sure we grab the right one here. So there's Claude Bagasse, and I decide I want to get rid of that, so I go wines, remove. And I pass in my model there. And when I pass in that model, it's going to know that I need to remove that one. And now I've got 3 in my collection. So now let's get into the important part, which is our views, right? This is where we're actually going to start seeing things on our screens. And something that I thought was a little bit of like, not a total light bulb, but a little bit like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes total sense, is the fact that when we talk about views, a view isn't the screen on your browser. A view is any visual element. So a button can be a view, a list can be a view, your entire screen can be your view. So when you're building your apps with Backbone, you're going to be embedding views within views. And when you update things, you might be removing a view and replacing it with another view, perhaps. So it's always good to think about any element, visual element, can be a view, and it kind of helps you break your app down and architect it. So here I'm creating a very basic view here, and there isn't much going on, but it's still nice to run it and see what's going on inside in our console. So here I've got my, my new instance of home, and I want to actually create it. So I'll say my wine app is going to be equal to a new home view, and when I output the wine app, we see, oh, okay, we've got something called EL here. We've got a CID, that's our client ID. We've got another EL, I'm not sure why, of course. And what's going on here? So this is one of the things that I think gets lost in all the tutorials that are out there about Backbone, is the concept of what is this EL, this element property. And this is what I consider like an empty box or a bucket that you're going to be putting things inside of. And so if I go into wine app here and I just output what the EL is, it's a div. So it's an empty div that I'm going to be putting things in. And you might ask yourself, well, I didn't define it though, right? That code in my slide deck, this is all I defined. I didn't define this element. Well, it gets created for you by default, and it's going to be, the default is a div. And so when you start looking at these sample apps that are built, you may see that the element has been defined, and sometimes it's not. So it's always good to sort of check that out and see what the author is doing with that example. But back in our example, we can see there's also another one, which is our $EL. And this is our jQuery representation of our element. So you'll be using this as a shorthand for appending data and filling your box. So you'll be calling $EL quite a bit, and you'll be appending HTML or other sorts of data and actually placing it inside of your div element. Okay, so now we're going to talk about rendering, okay? Because it's kind of a multi-step process. You figure out what your element is, and then we want to render it. And as you'll see here, there's our $ element. We're appending some HTML to it, and we're returning this. The reason that you want to include the return this statement is because that will allow you to chain your methods together and actually pull information out of your view after you've rendered it. Maybe you want to render it and then pull that element out of it and append it to another div in another view, perhaps. So I'm going to go and run this example here. And so there's my home view. And I'm going to try running the render method here. And now when I look inside my element, I can see that I've got my HTML has been appended to it. But it's still not showing up on my screen. Right? I still need to, there's one piece missing, there's another step missing, and I need to figure that out. So I'm going to just do one more thing here just to see what happens. If I call and I render again, and now I'll put my element. Oh. Well, that's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. That's okay. Go back. So we don't want to have to manually render our views every time we call them. That seems like extra work. So with Backbone, you can use this initialize statement in any of your views. And you'll see this a lot. You'll see this.render. And this will just take care of that step that I did manually in the previous example. But what if I don't want my box to be a div? let's say I want my box to be the entire body for my page, or maybe I want to target a class or another HTML element. You can definitely do that using Backbone. Here I'm setting my element to a specific HTML element, the body. And inside my render function, I'm actually emptying it out first. And the reason you'll do that is because if you don't, you'll end up re-rendering the same content into the same element. And you don't want to keep re-rendering multiple times, especially if you're listening for events that are being triggered multiple times. So here I go to 5, and voila, we're so excited. We're seeing something on our white screen now. So those are the basic steps for getting your view up there. But what if I want a list view? So in this situation, I'm setting it as an unordered list, and I'm emptying it out first, and I'm appending a couple of list items there. And then in this code, I'm actually taking my home view, and I want to create a new instance of my list view, and I want to append it. Well, actually, I want to take it, I want to render it, and I want to grab the element out of it, and I want to append it to my home view. So here, I've got my app, and I've got my view being rendered inside there, my list view being rendered inside there, and it's being appended on there automatically for me. Oh, templates. Okay, so this is where things get better, I think, as far as why you want to use Backbone, is the fact that you can use templates. Now there's lots of different libraries out there, Handlebars, Mustache, lots of different JavaScript frameworks. Actually, _JS comes with a basic templating engine, and so that's what I've decided to use in my examples here today. And this helps you separate your designers and your developers if you need to. Your designers can focus on creating these templates for you. You can dynamically load them into your apps and use them when you need to. And this is what a basic template looks like. At the top, we've got a script tag. We give it an ID so that we can target it. And inside of it, we have a list element. And you'll see it's got like a % equals. Handlebars uses little double curly braces for designating what is a variable and what needs to be substituted. But essentially, you pass in a JSON object, and it will substitute whatever values in your templates you've designated as a variable that needs to be replaced. And then down below in Backbone, I've actually defined what my template for this page is going to be by targeting the item container and grabbing the HTML from that and passing it into the _templates method. All good? And then we go and we grab our element for this view, and we say append this template, and then we pass in our object. Here it's just passing in a value of hello Backbone. And there it is. So we did those first 2 lines we added, and then we added a third one using a template. Which, that's kind of okay. That's not super exciting. What happens if I could go and actually grab those wines out of that collection, and I could loop over each of those, pass it as an argument, each of those models, take the model wine.toJSON, pass that into a template, and append that to my list view. Now it starts to get a little more interesting. And so here it's passing it in there. But my view still is a little bit, I won't say stupid, but he still doesn't know what's going on. In another couple slides, you're going to see that we need to have our view listen for changes in our collections so he can update himself. But before we get to that, I wanted to introduce the concept of routers. Now, routers were previously called controllers in Backbone.js, but they didn't really act like controllers completely. They sort of were, well, more like a router where it just kept information about the state of your application, and so that you could actually target different routes that would then load different views or take different actions. So here's an extremely basic app router that has 3 different endpoints: the root of your app, the add, or the close. And the way you get to those routes is you just put a # at the end of your URL. So it would be localhost pound, or index.html pound add, and then that would load the add view. And all it's doing is it's just adding the add view to our home screen. I'm going to miss that meeting. All right. All right, so here I am. I've got my wine list. I've got this nice button over here that you probably can't see too well, but it's targeting the hashtag and, so it's targeting the and route. And I'm putting out some console messages just so I know where I am in my app. So I click that. It hits the add view, and then the add view adds itself to the home view. I actually have a little fragment of HTML that I'm targeting, and I'm saying just append this view here. And when I hit the cancel button, it's actually calling a close route, which is then just refreshing the home view and removing that add view from there. So that's all it's doing, nothing really fancy yet. Okay, we covered that. Okay, and how do we start this whole thing off? Because Backbone actually can keep track of your history. So as you're navigating forward and backwards in your app, Backbone can actually keep track of that history so that the back button in your browser works properly. And so inside of a document.ready tag, I'm initializing my app router and I'm setting the Backbone history to start. And this is what I was talking about, being a fragment. So that create new wine in that whole form, that is a view right there that's being targeted. If I jump back to the browser, it's kind of nice to look in here in the inspector and actually see the HTML that's going on in there. Okay, so here I've got this I've got this container, I've got a header, I've got this row, and I've got my list over here. But my row's only doing a span 4. I've still got some space on the right side. And so what I'm doing is I'm targeting this row class, and I'm doing an append to it. So when I click this button, it appends a span 8 here, and inside of that is my actual template. Now I'm not dynamically populating any data in here yet, but I definitely could. And this is my add form, and it can also be my edit form if I want. And this is probably the last key piece of Backbone information, and that's the concept of events and the fact that you can actually set to listen for click events inside of your view. Or key presses or whatever kind of events you want to listen for. Here I'm targeting a button, and when that add button gets clicked, I then want to call an add method that I've defined. This isn't something that Backbone gives you. It gives you a lot of latitude to define your own methods, but things like initialize and render, those are standard Backbone methods, but we can start adding our own methods in our own application. So here I'm doing an add method. So if I go here, back to the console, and oops, 1, 2, 4. And I come in here to my router and I click add wine and I say hello. And I click the add button. Now it's just outputting that value to the console. And now this is where we tie it all together we introduce our models and collections back so that we can actually store the values from that form into our collection and have the view listening for those changes and update just the list on the left without touching the rest of the page. So here with add, I'm simply creating a new instance of my wine model, and I'm using the add method on my collection, and then I'm clearing the form. Here I'm doing a render, so I'm taking my list view and I'm passing in my collection of wines into the list view, and then I'm rendering and appending it to this span 4. And the reason why I pass in that collection, this is again something that you have to sort of remember and wrap your head around, is that I'm passing in that collection so that I can then bind to listen to any event changes. I can listen to a change event, but in this case I'm listening to all events, and if I hear any events coming from my collection that it's changed, then I want to render this list view again. And as you can see below, I'm simply clearing out that unordered list and then looping over my collection and populating it using a template. So here I add a new wine. I say hello. I click add. Say goodbye. And it's merely just appending those into that list, and it's updating itself as it hears the changes occur. So I talked about fragments. This is just, again, the list view is simply a view within a view, and it's listening for changes in the collection and updating itself. And so when you look in the big picture, Backbone doesn't follow the traditional model view controller pattern where it actually has a separate controller. It actually has a lot of the controller logic built into your view. So it's sort of a model view controller, or MV stars is what they like to say. And so how do we hook this all back into a back end and persist our data without having to write a lot of server-side code, worrying about our back end and our databases and setting up our schemas and things like that? And so with StackMob, where I work, we add an extension to Backbone where we add a JavaScript library. And after you add that, you can initialize the StackMob object with your public key. And once you've done that, then you can start defining your models and collections to actually have a back end. So this is how I would modify the example that we were just working on. Instead of calling backbone.model.extend, I call stackmob.model.extend, and I set the schema name to wines. And then same thing with my collection. I set it to the StackMob collection and define my model. And when I initiate my new wines, I can actually call a fetch command, and it'll go to the server and pull down all of my current wines that are up there. And I'm running this on a local Python server here. And so if we go back here, if I refresh this view, oops, sorry. If I refresh that app I was working with before, all my data goes away. But if I go over here to this, to the one I'm running with StackMob, it actually goes and fetches all of my wines when I first load them up. I can go in here and I can add a new wine. I'm a Camus Vineyards fan, and it adds Camus onto my list there for me dynamically. And I added one other feature. I added the update route. And what the update route does is it actually gets the ID from that gets passed back from StackMob and actually appends it to my URL. So I go update pound and then whatever my ID is. And when I hit the update route, I'm going into my collection and pulling out that model and populating my form element. And so the JavaScript behind that, when I save an object, I'm doing a create instead of an add. Create is how you create a new object. And when you do that, it hits StackMob's RESTful endpoint. It comes back with a success or error callback. And inside of that success is your model, including an ID. And when you add it to your collection, it's now then available for you locally in your collection. And here you can see this is where my template's been modified. I've actually created a different template. This has an update instead of an add. And what it has is the wine ID being populated from the JSON object along with the name. And also down here below, you can see I'm passing in, when I call the update route, I'm passing in a parameter called E, and that is my ID. And I just do wines.getE, and it knows that it's going to get it by the ID and pulls it back out of the collection and passes it as a model to my update view. And here, so you can go and grab any options. You can pass any option that you want to define to your views. So here I have one called this.options.model. That's getting that model that's being passed from my router. And I assign it to a local variable, this.model. And then I can call a save method on it when I save any changes to that actual wine listing. And when I call save, it persists it to my server, and then again we get a success and callback handler. Now I actually have crammed about a 90-minute or more course that I did into this 45 minutes. But I did do this whole course on Udemy on Backbone.js. It covers everything that I've done here today. But it also gives you some more information about Backbone, sort of stretched out a little bit, more of a screencast. You can rewind it, watch what you want. You can download all the examples that I showed you here today at this Udemy course. And there's my contact information if you want to shoot me an email after the fact or hit me up on Twitter and ask any questions. So thanks for coming, everybody.